the world awoke to a storm that had been gathering quietly for years, a tempest of ideology, aggression, and ambition that erupted into total war. For the United States, a nation that had long cherished the notion of isolation, the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was a lightning bolt that shattered complacency and thrust the country onto the global stage. The shock waves were immediate, battleships exploded, planes fell from the sky, and over 2,000 Americans lost their lives in a single morning. Yet, amidst the horror and destruction, a resolve crystallized. The American people, long hesitant to intervene in European or Asian conflicts, united behind a single-purpose victory. This moment would mark the beginning of a transformation, not only in the scale of U.S. military engagement but in the very nature of American strategy, diplomacy, and international influence. Even before Pearl Harbor, the United States had been grappling with the question of how to respond to the growing threats in Europe and the Pacific. Adolf Hitler's lightning campaigns across the European continent, the occupation of France, and the relentless bombing of Britain presented an unprecedented challenge to global stability. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan's expansion into China and Southeast Asia threatened American economic interests and the security of allies. Initially, U.S. policy focused on material support rather than direct confrontation. Programs like Lend-Lease, which provided vital arms, food, and equipment to Britain and later the Soviet Union, reflected a delicate balance between aiding allies and avoiding direct involvement. However, strategic planners recognized that such measures were temporary, a direct confrontation would eventually be inevitable, and preparation for large-scale engagement had to begin immediately. Once formally at war, the United States faced the immense challenge of fighting on multiple fronts. Europe demanded a decisive and coordinated approach, while the Pacific required a fundamentally different strategy involving naval dominance, island assaults, and long-range logistics. Within months of entering the conflict, American military planners debated the sequencing of priorities, a question that would dominate policy discussions throughout the war. The Europe First strategy emerged as a pragmatic compromise. Defeating Nazi Germany was paramount, but the Pacific theater could not be ignored. Resources, manpower, and technology would be allocated accordingly, reflecting a careful calculus of risk and necessity. This approach demanded unprecedented coordination among Allied powers, particularly between the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The complexity of U.S. operations necessitated innovations in both strategy and logistics. The nation's industrial base became a decisive weapon in itself, as factories churned out tanks, planes, ships, and munitions at an astonishing rate. Cities transformed into hubs of wartime production, with men and women working in tandem to supply the front lines. Innovations in mechanization, aircraft design, and communications were accelerated by necessity, creating a technological edge that would prove decisive. At the same time, the military had to grapple with the realities of global supply chains, troop deployments across oceans, and the maintenance of morale among millions of service members. Every decision from the timing of invasions to the allocation of resources was informed by a combination of intelligence, logistics, and political diplomacy, reflecting the increasingly interconnected nature of modern warfare. Diplomacy became as critical as military might. Conferences with Allied leaders shaped the trajectory of the war and set precedents for post-war cooperation. In Tehran in 1943, President Franklin D. Roosevelt met with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin to coordinate military campaigns and discuss the broader political landscape. These meetings were more than tactical discussions, they were exercises in trust-building and strategic alignment among nations with very different political systems and objectives. Roosevelt's ability to navigate these delicate negotiations demonstrated the United States' emerging role as a central mediator in global affairs. Decisions made in these chambers had tangible consequences on the battlefield, influencing the timing of invasions, the opening of supply routes, and the post-war vision for Europe. The human dimension of the war was equally formidable. American soldiers faced grueling conditions in Europe and the Pacific, confronting both the enemy and the physical limits of endurance. Campaigns such as D-Day, the liberation of Italy, and the brutal battles on Pacific Islands tested courage and ingenuity in equal measure. Intelligence gathered by the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, provided critical insights into enemy positions and operations, while innovations in communications and cryptography allowed for coordinated strikes across vast distances. Each victory, no matter how small, was a testament to the integration of planning, technology, and human resolve. Civilian populations in occupied territories also played a vital role, offering resistance and intelligence that aided Allied operations. The war thus became a global endeavor in which the United States functioned not merely as a participant but as an indispensable leader. Simultaneously, the U.S. home front experienced profound transformations. The mobilization of millions of workers, the entry of women into industrial labor, and the integration of minority groups into the workforce reshaped social dynamics. Rationing, war bonds, and propaganda campaigns fostered a sense of shared purpose, linking domestic effort directly to military success. Scientific research surged, producing innovations ranging from radar technology to medical advancements, all driven by the imperatives of wartime necessity. The convergence of industry, science, and manpower created a unique national synergy, illustrating how the war effort extended far beyond the battlefield and into every facet of American life. By 1944, the United States had fully assumed its role as a global military and industrial powerhouse. The liberation of occupied territories in Europe, the eventual defeat of Germany, and advances across the Pacific were the results of integrated planning, sustained industrial output, and strategic foresight. Moreover, the war had provided invaluable lessons in coalition building, diplomacy, and intelligence, lessons that would shape U.S. foreign policy and security strategy for decades to come. The challenges faced and overcome during this period demonstrated that victory required not only strength and courage but also vision and coordination on an unprecedented scale. Ultimately, the United States' entry into World War II marked the transformation of the nation from a largely isolationist power into a decisive global actor. The convergence of military strategy, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and diplomatic skill created a new paradigm for national power. The war demanded the simultaneous management of global operations, domestic mobilization, and complex alliances, a test that the United States passed with remarkable effectiveness. As the Allies advanced toward victory, it became clear that America's experience during this conflict would not merely end with the defeat of Axis powers but would redefine its role in the world, laying the foundation for leadership in an era dominated by ideological rivalry, international institutions, and the emerging Cold War. The entry into World War II thus stands as both a turning point and a catalyst, illustrating the nation's capacity for rapid adaptation, strategic vision, and coordinated action. From the rubble of Pearl Harbor to the shores of Normandy, from the factories of Detroit to the laboratories developing cutting-edge technologies, the United States demonstrated the full spectrum of modern power. The lessons learned in this crucible would shape not only the outcome of the war but also the contours of American influence in the decades that followed, heralding an era in which intelligence, diplomacy, and industrial might would define the nation's role on the global stage. Strategic decisions and the road to victory. As the world emerged from the chaos of early conflict, the United States found itself at the center of an unprecedented strategic challenge. The war was no longer a regional struggle, it was a global confrontation requiring careful orchestration of resources, diplomacy, and military ingenuity. American leaders faced the monumental task of deciding not only how to defeat their enemies but also how to structure a post-war world in which the United States would play a decisive role. Central to this process was the question of strategy, where to focus military efforts, how to coordinate with allies, and how to integrate intelligence and technology to achieve maximum impact. These were not merely tactical concerns, they were decisions that would shape the trajectory of nations and the future of global power. The Pacific and European theaters presented vastly different challenges. In Europe, Nazi Germany had entrenched its forces across a continent fortified by years of occupation. Conventional battles would be costly, requiring massive troop deployments, coordinated offensives, and careful timing. The Europe First doctrine, agreed upon by Roosevelt and Churchill, prioritized the defeat of Germany even as Japan expanded across the Pacific. This decision reflected an understanding of the relative threats. Hitler's regime, with its industrial base, military capacity, and ideological ambitions, represented a more immediate danger to global stability. The Pacific Campaign, though critical, could be approached with a combination of naval power, air superiority, and incremental advances across island chains. This dual-front strategy demanded meticulous planning, flexibility, and the ability to shift resources rapidly in response to unfolding events. Coordination with allied nations became a cornerstone of the strategy. The Tehran Conference of 1943 exemplified the complexity of wartime diplomacy. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin convened not merely to discuss operations but to align long-term objectives. The conference highlighted the challenge of reconciling competing priorities. Stalin demanded a second front to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union, while Roosevelt sought to maintain cohesion among the Allies without overcommitting resources. The outcome, a commitment to launch Operation Overlord in Normandy in 1944, demonstrated the interplay of diplomacy and military planning. It also illustrated the United States' emerging role as a mediator and strategic architect, capable of balancing conflicting interests to achieve collective objectives. In the Pacific, the nature of warfare demanded innovation. Unlike the conventional battlefields of Europe, the Pacific theater required amphibious assaults, naval dominance, and logistical expertise across vast oceanic distances. Campaigns such as Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa tested American military planning and operational endurance. Success relied not only on brute force but on intelligence, reconnaissance, and adaptability. The Navy and Marine Corps coordinated complex operations to capture strategically important islands, while the Army Air Forces provided air support and reconnaissance. Every operation was informed by careful analysis of terrain, enemy capabilities, and supply lines, reflecting a level of precision and planning unprecedented in previous conflicts. Intelligence emerged as a decisive factor in shaping operations on both fronts. The experience of World War II underscored the value of accurate, timely information. The Office of Strategic Services had laid the groundwork for modern intelligence operations, and lessons learned from espionage, code breaking, and reconnaissance became integral to strategy. Intercepted communications, reports from resistance networks, and aerial reconnaissance provided insights that allowed U.S. commanders to anticipate enemy movements, exploit vulnerabilities, and minimize unnecessary casualties. The integration of intelligence into operational planning represented a significant evolution in the conduct of war, bridging the gap between information and decisive action. Technology and industry also played a central role in operational success. The United States leveraged its industrial capacity to produce vast quantities of equipment, ranging from tanks and aircraft to ammunition and vehicles. Innovations such as long-range bombers, radar, and amphibious landing craft gave American forces a tactical advantage. Equally important was the capacity to sustain prolonged operations across multiple theaters. Supply chains were managed with precision, transporting men and materials across oceans to meet the demands of simultaneous campaigns. This industrial military synergy reflected the total mobilization of national resources and highlighted the United States' ability to convert economic power into battlefield effectiveness. Strategic planning extended beyond immediate military objectives to the broader geopolitical implications of the conflict. American leaders understood that the outcome of the war would determine the shape of international relations for decades. Planning for the post-war order began even as battles raged. Roosevelt and his advisors recognized the need for institutions that could maintain peace, facilitate reconstruction, and stabilize economies. Conferences such as Bretton Woods in 1944 exemplified this forward-looking approach, laying the foundation for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These initiatives were not merely economic, they were instruments of influence, designed to prevent future conflict, promote stability, and extend American leadership into the post-war era. The interplay of diplomacy, strategy, and logistics created a dynamic in which victories were not accidental but the result of careful orchestration. Each campaign was the product of multiple layers of planning, operational details, intelligence assessments, resource allocation, and coordination with allies. For example, the liberation of France required months of preparation, including deception campaigns to mislead German forces, careful selection of landing sites, and synchronized air and naval support. Success was contingent on the precise alignment of these elements, demonstrating the sophistication of American strategic planning. Similarly, in the Pacific, the capture of critical islands required a combination of naval bombardment, amphibious landings, and aerial support, all informed by intelligence that identified enemy fortifications and troop deployments. Throughout these campaigns, the United States faced the dual challenge of projecting power while preparing for an uncertain post-war world. Leaders had to anticipate not only military responses but political repercussions, managing relationships with allies, neutral countries, and occupied territories. Every decision from the timing of invasions to the selection of targets had implications for the future balance of power. The success of these efforts cemented the United States' position as a global leader, capable of shaping outcomes far beyond its borders. It also demonstrated a new approach to warfare, a combination of force, foresight, and strategic diplomacy that integrated military, economic, and political tools into a coherent whole. By the end of 1944, the United States had achieved remarkable progress on multiple fronts. The Normandy invasion had opened the path to Germany's heartland, the Pacific Island hopping campaign had brought American forces closer to Japan, and the coordination with Allied powers had strengthened global partnerships. The integration of intelligence, industry, technology, and diplomacy had created a comprehensive model of modern warfare, one in which military might alone was insufficient without strategic vision and precise execution. The lessons of this period would resonate for decades, shaping U.S. military doctrine, foreign policy, and the role of intelligence in national security. In retrospect, the strategic decisions made during this phase of the war reveal the complexity and foresight that defined America's approach. By balancing multiple theaters, leveraging industrial and technological advantages, and integrating intelligence into operations, the United States not only achieved military victories but also laid the foundation for global influence. The decisions of these years, often made under intense pressure, with incomplete information, and against formidable adversaries, demonstrate the evolution of American strategy from reactive defense to proactive global engagement. This period set the stage for the final phase of the war, the occupation of defeated powers, and the emergence of the United States as a central actor in the post-war international order. Shadows of power, the rise of American intelligence. In the quiet aftermath of World War II, the battlefields may have fallen silent, but a new kind of war was beginning, one fought not with tanks, bombs, or ships, but with secrets, codes, and invisible networks that spanned continents. The United States had emerged from the global conflict as a superpower, yet the victories in Europe and the Pacific revealed a stark truth: military triumph alone could not secure influence or protect national interests in an increasingly complex world. The post-war environment was volatile, shaped by the collapse of old empires, the rise of new ideologies, and the emergence of rival powers capable of global reach. In this arena, knowledge became a weapon, and the institutions capable of gathering, analyzing, and acting on information became vital tools for survival and strategy. The idea of a centralized intelligence service gained momentum during the war, when various American agencies had worked in isolation to collect information, conduct espionage, and coordinate sabotage. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, created under William Donovan, had demonstrated the power of organized intelligence. OSS agents operated behind enemy lines in Europe and Asia, establishing networks of spies, liaising with resistance movements, and providing detailed reports that informed operational decisions at the highest levels. Beyond gathering information, the OSS pioneered unconventional warfare tactics, covert sabotage missions disrupted enemy supply lines, and psychological operations sought to weaken morale and foment dissent within hostile populations. These experiences showcase the potential of intelligence to influence outcomes on a scale equal to conventional military operations. As the war ended, the United States faced the task of transitioning from a wartime intelligence apparatus to a permanent peacetime structure. Military planners and policymakers recognized that the geopolitical landscape was entering an era of ideological conflict, with the Soviet Union consolidating power in Eastern Europe and China on the brink of civil war. Traditional diplomacy and conventional military forces were insufficient to manage these emerging threats. The solution was a centralized, civilian-led intelligence agency that could operate globally, providing the president and policymakers with continuous, accurate, and actionable insights. This vision materialized with the National Security Act of 1947, which formally established the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Unlike its wartime predecessor, the CIA was designed to function year-round, not merely as a temporary wartime tool. Its mandate extended beyond espionage to encompass political, economic, and military intelligence. Analysts were tasked with evaluating global events, predicting shifts in power, and advising policymakers on preventive strategies. Covert operations became a key component of the CIA's mission. The agency was empowered to engage in activities that shaped foreign affairs from behind-the-scenes propaganda campaigns, economic influence, and the support or destabilization of governments considered hostile to American interests. This marked a fundamental shift. Intelligence was no longer reactive or supportive but proactive, a means of shaping the international environment before threats could escalate into conflict. The CIA's early years coincided with the rise of the Cold War, a struggle defined by ideological rivalry between the capitalist West and the communist East. The Soviet Union's consolidation of influence in Eastern Europe, coupled with rapid militarization and nuclear capability, created a pressing need for robust intelligence networks. The CIA focused on building global human intelligence, HUMINT, operations, cultivating informants within foreign governments, infiltrating political movements, and monitoring military installations. Communications intelligence, comment, and code-breaking techniques, refined during World War II, were expanded to track Soviet activities. These methods enabled the United States to anticipate strategic moves, influence diplomatic negotiations, and counter covert Soviet operations without triggering direct military confrontation. Technology played a transformative role in the agency's development. The early Cold War witnessed the adoption of aerial reconnaissance platforms, spy planes, and photographic satellites capable of providing unprecedented global surveillance. Analysts developed methods to process vast quantities of information, translating raw data into strategic assessments that could inform decision-making at the highest levels. The integration of technology and human intelligence created a comprehensive picture of global events, reducing uncertainty in an era when miscalculation could lead to catastrophe. It also demonstrated a new principle of warfare: information itself could serve as both shield and sword, offering strategic advantage without conventional combat. Covert operations became a hallmark of the CIA, reflecting its dual mission of intelligence gathering and proactive intervention. Early operations targeted nations where ideological or political instability threatened American interests. In Iran, the agency orchestrated efforts to influence political outcomes and secure access to vital oil resources. In Greece and Turkey, the CIA provided support to governments resisting communist influence. Latin America became another theater of early operations, with interventions designed to protect pro-American regimes and destabilize movements perceived as aligned with Moscow. These missions, often clandestine and controversial, underscored a key concept: in a world divided by ideology, intelligence was not merely observational but an instrument of policy. The agency also emphasized analytical rigor. Specialists trained in economics, politics, sociology, and military strategy contributed to assessments that guided U.S. foreign policy. Unlike the fragmented wartime intelligence system, the CIA operated as a centralized hub for synthesizing information from multiple sources. Daily briefings, reports, and strategic forecasts became routine for policymakers, reflecting the understanding that knowledge, timely and accurate, was a cornerstone of global power. The combination of field operations, technological capability, and analytical expertise made the CIA an indispensable tool for navigating a world where threats were often invisible and unpredictable. Domestically, the rise of intelligence provoked debates over oversight, secrecy, and the limits of governmental power. The agency operated largely outside public view, raising questions about accountability in a democratic system. Balancing operational effectiveness with legal and ethical constraints became an ongoing challenge, one that would intensify as the Cold War progressed. Nevertheless, the consensus among U.S. leaders was clear: the capacity to understand and influence global events through intelligence was not optional but essential for national survival. By the mid-1950s, the CIA had established itself as a permanent pillar of American power. Its combination of covert operations, global surveillance, and analytical insight allowed the United States to project influence far beyond its borders, shaping political, economic, and military outcomes in strategic regions. The agency's evolution reflected a broader transformation in the nature of warfare and diplomacy. Victory and security now depended as much on knowledge, foresight, and subtle manipulation as on armies, bombs, and ships. Intelligence had become both the invisible shield protecting American interests and the unseen blade cutting through threats before they could reach national soil. The rise of the CIA thus represents a pivotal chapter in American history, marking the transition from conventional, battlefield-focused power to the modern concept of comprehensive national security. It institutionalized lessons learned during World War II: the importance of preparation, the integration of information into strategic planning, and the necessity of proactive engagement, and applied them to a post-war context defined by uncertainty, ideological rivalry, and technological change. In the decades that followed, the agency would continue to shape global events, sometimes in ways that were controversial, sometimes in ways that preserved stability, but always as a central instrument of American influence. In the end, the birth of the CIA highlights a fundamental truth of the modern era: power is inseparable from knowledge. The United States' ability to maintain security, anticipate threats, and shape global outcomes depended not only on what it could build or fight but on what it could understand, predict, and influence. In the shadows of the post-war world, intelligence emerged as the silent architect of strategy, defining a new battlefield where information itself became the ultimate weapon. Eyes in the shadows: the emergence of American intelligence. The end of World War II brought celebration, relief, and exhaustion across the globe, but for the United States, victory also meant stepping into a vastly more complicated world. The war had demonstrated the immense power of industrial might and military strategy, yet it had also revealed the critical importance of information, knowing your enemy, understanding their intentions, and acting decisively before threats materialized. As Europe and Asia struggled to rebuild, and as the Soviet Union expanded its influence across Eastern Europe, U.S. leaders realized that conventional military superiority alone could not safeguard national interests. The post-war environment demanded a new type of weapon, a mechanism capable of observing, analyzing, and shaping the global chessboard from behind the scenes. This realization set the stage for the creation of America's first peacetime intelligence agency, the Central Intelligence Agency. The roots of modern U.S. intelligence lay in the wartime Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which had pioneered espionage, sabotage, and clandestine operations during the war. The OSS demonstrated that small, highly trained units operating in secrecy could wield influence far beyond their numbers. From coordinating resistance movements in Nazi-occupied Europe to gathering critical intelligence on Japanese operations in Asia, OSS operatives proved that knowledge could decisively influence military campaigns. Yet, the OSS was temporary, dissolved shortly after Japan's surrender, leaving a void in America's capacity for global intelligence. Policymakers quickly recognized that the lessons of wartime espionage could not be abandoned. The emerging Cold War demanded an organized, permanent system to monitor a rapidly polarizing world. In 1947, the National Security Act formalized this vision, creating the CIA as the United States centralized civilian intelligence service. Unlike the OSS, which was primarily tactical, the CIA was tasked with strategic objectives, analyzing political trends, monitoring economic developments, and advising policymakers on global security threats. The agency's mission extended beyond mere observation. It was empowered to conduct covert operations, influence foreign governments, and counteract adversarial actions before they could escalate. This reflected a fundamental shift in American strategy. In the post-war era, intelligence was no longer a supporting role but a central instrument of power and policy. From its inception, the CIA confronted the daunting task of adapting to a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. The Soviet Union's consolidation of control in Eastern Europe and the proliferation of communist movements in Asia created a pervasive sense of urgency in Washington. Unlike conventional warfare, which relied on visible military deployments, intelligence required subtlety and foresight. Analysts needed to interpret fragmentary reports, signals, and rumors into coherent forecasts that could prevent strategic surprises. The stakes were immense. A miscalculation could mean the loss of influence, strategic blunders, or even escalation into armed conflict. The CIA became the United States' eyes and ears in a world where threats were often invisible and decisions had to be made in real time. Human intelligence, HUMINT, formed the backbone of the CIA's early operations. Agents recruited foreign officials, defectors, and informants who could provide insight into political intentions, military movements, and technological developments. Networks were established across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, often under the most difficult conditions. In countries like Iran, China, and Eastern European states behind the Iron Curtain, CIA operatives risked exposure, imprisonment, or worse. These operations required creativity, diplomacy, and meticulous planning, reflecting a new understanding that intelligence was as much about human judgment as technical expertise. Covert action became another defining feature of the CIA. Learning from the OSS, the agency began to intervene discreetly in political processes abroad. This could involve funding sympathetic political factions, conducting propaganda campaigns, or destabilizing regimes hostile to American interests. In Latin America and the Middle East, the CIA experimented with methods to influence public opinion, control media narratives, and protect strategic economic assets. While controversial, these activities highlighted a principle that would shape the agency's operations for decades: intelligence was not merely reactive, it could proactively shape global outcomes in ways traditional diplomacy or military power could not. Technology played an increasingly critical role in extending the CIA's reach. Building on wartime innovations in aerial reconnaissance, code breaking, and signal interception, the agency developed sophisticated tools to monitor global communications and observe strategic sites. Spy planes, encrypted communications, and early electronic surveillance systems allowed analysts to track adversaries with unprecedented precision. These technological advancements, combined with the agency's human networks, created a multi-layered intelligence system capable of providing policymakers with both raw data and refined analysis. This integration of technology and human judgment set a new standard for modern intelligence operations. The analytical component of the CIA's work also distinguished it from wartime intelligence agencies. Specialists in economics, political science, and military affairs were tasked with producing assessments that went beyond mere description, offering forecasts and strategic recommendations. Daily intelligence briefings for the president became routine, ensuring that the nation's leadership was constantly informed of emerging threats and opportunities. Analysts developed methodologies to detect patterns, anticipate enemy actions, and evaluate potential outcomes, creating a level of strategic foresight that had been largely absent in earlier conflicts. The rise of the CIA also had profound domestic implications. Operating largely in secrecy, the agency prompted debates over oversight, accountability, and the balance between security and civil liberties. Lawmakers wrestled with the challenge of empowering the CIA to act decisively abroad while maintaining democratic controls at home. These debates set the stage for future reforms, hearings, and legislation that would define the agency's relationship with the public and government institutions. Yet despite these challenges, the consensus among policymakers was clear: the United States could not afford to ignore intelligence in the post-war era. Global influence, national security, and the prevention of surprise crises depended on a sophisticated, permanent intelligence capability. By the early 1950s, the CIA had firmly established its role as a central component of American power. Its combination of covert operations, global surveillance, and in-depth analysis allowed the United States to respond to threats, shape political developments abroad, and maintain strategic advantage over the Soviet Union. The agency's influence extended far beyond military matters, touching diplomacy, economics, and even cultural arenas, as the U.S. sought to project power and protect interests in every corner of the globe. Intelligence had become inseparable from national strategy, reflecting a fundamental understanding that in the modern world, knowledge itself was a form of currency and power. The creation and growth of the CIA marked a turning point in the nature of American security and foreign policy. Lessons from World War II about the importance of preparation, information integration, and proactive measures were institutionalized in a permanent framework capable of operating across peacetime and crisis. The agency became both a shield against unseen threats and a tool for shaping global events before they could escalate into conflict. It embodied the principle that in an interconnected, unpredictable world, the ability to anticipate, influence, and act on intelligence was as vital as any army or fleet. In the grand sweep of history, the rise of the CIA represents more than the establishment of an agency, it reflects a transformation in the very concept of power. The United States had learned that in the post-war era, victory would not only be measured by battles won on the field but by the ability to understand the world, foresee dangers, and quietly shape outcomes in its favor. In this new domain of shadows, secrets, and strategy, the CIA emerged as the linchpin of American influence, signaling that the future of global dominance would rely as much on brains as on brawn.